John Edwards used his veto pen over 24 times following the end of the legislative session.
So now state lawmakers who want to cancel next week's override session have until midnight to turn in their ballots. As Sabrina Wilson reports, lawmakers and political observers say the special session will happen.
Under Louisiana law, veto override sessions are automatically scheduled once a governor vetoes any legislation, and July 13th is the deadline for lawmakers to cancel the one triggered by recent vetoes. And the sentiment from lawmakers on both sides of the political aisle is that the session will happen.
And everyone we've talked to has told me, everybody we suspect that is not sending their ballot in is not going to send it in. So I feel confident.
It seems like there's not a chance anymore that we're going to get a majority in the Senate, which is what we were hoping for. There's just a lot of pressure, even on people who are term limited, to come back.
Governor John Edwards issued 25 vetoes, including line items to restore $100 million cut from the state health department.
I am glad that he put the $100 million back.
But the vetoes that are generating the most buzz is Edwards striking down bills aimed at LGBTQ people, including a ban on gender-affirming medical care for transgender youth. Republican Senator Kirk Talbot represents Jefferson Parish in the legislature.
The first one that comes to mind is obviously the transgender bill that, allows that would prevent, surgeries and puberty blockers for young children. I think that needs to be overturned.
Representative Mandy Landry, a Democrat, represents New Orleans at the state capitol.
I voted against all of those. These culture war bills, they're just meant to divide and to bully people and to hurt people. And I will be voting to sustain the governor's veto as well.
The override session has been expected for a while now by political observers.
Dillard University political analyst Dr. Robert Collins says the LGBTQ legislation is at the heart of the desire by many conservatives to hold the override session. It's also an election year.
And some of the members have actually said that publicly, that those were the bills that were going to get them back, because those are the bills that receive national publicity, and those are the bills that their constituents know about.
Meanwhile, a new poll conducted statewide by pollster Greg Rigamer for the group Citizens for a New Louisiana found that 70% of those surveyed believed that the state legislature was irresponsible in the preparation and passing of the state budget. Only 10% felt that they acted responsibly.
And certainly it was chaotic towards the end, and the House changed a lot of things. Once we sent it over, we didn't have a lot of time to look at it. That process has been better in the past, and moving forward, we need to do a better job of doing that.
Meanwhile, the question of veto overrides comes as the governor has 6 months left in office.
I think the governor expects to be overridden. He's a smart politician. He can count votes. So he expects to be overridden.
Collins thinks Governor Edwards believes history will prove him right on the LGBTQ bills. A 2/3 approval from both the House and Senate is needed to override a veto. Democrats hope to get some Republicans to vote to uphold the governor's vetoes, but Dr. Collins says that's an uphill climb.